Man, happy Sunday to you. There is a red hue in the room. There must be a game, right? Is that what's going on? I bet some of you guys got chili in the crock pot, right? Like you're ready to go home and get real happy or mad. And so my iPad doesn't work. Oh, wait a second. There it is. Done it once before. We can do it again. But hey, I want you to be aware of really one thing real quick as we dive into this, that starting in February, we're going to start doing baptisms in 2024. And so if you've not been baptized in water since you put your faith in Jesus, there is not a better time for you to do that than we're going to have one next week, and then we're going to, not the week after that, but then the week after that. And we will keep them coming so long as there are people signing up. And hear me. We talk about baptism a lot. We want it to be really easy for you, that in your seats, there's actually a card that you can fill out and drop in the offering receptacle on your way out the door. And the reason why we want to make it very easy for you is because it is incredibly important. And we'll look at that a little bit in the text, but I would just say this. This series is called What Would Jesus Do? The bracelets and all that stuff. What would Jesus do? One of the things that we know that he did is he was baptized. That he was baptized in water. That was kind of how he started his ministry, was he started by being baptized. And so one of the most fundamental ways that you can be like Jesus and do what he would do is by being baptized. And so just say something about it. It's on your seat. We'd love for you to do it. It's always really powerful to watch God transform people's lives and them to show that with that. And so we're pumped about getting ready to do that. We've got several people who've already signed up. But this is our last week of the series, What Would Jesus Do? So that the 90s music is now back in the vault, unless you come to next service, okay? And so, but we're going back into the new millennium, the Willennium that Will Smith started in 2000. It's still happening. And so we are excited about that. And you don't want to miss next week. We'll actually be kicking off a new series too. But we're finishing up this series, and the point of this series is to ask the question, what would Jesus do? That we think foundational to, even as we head into 2024, one of the most important things a person can ask is what would Jesus do? As it pertains to our circumstances, as it pertains to what we do with our lives, that is maybe the most important question, is what would Jesus do? And we're going to look at a text this morning, and it's less about maybe what would Jesus do, and it's more of a text that would say, what would Jesus want me to do? And it's a text that's relatively familiar if you've grown up in church or if you've been here for a little bit. I'll quote this verse from time to time. But what really strikes me as I was thinking about it with this week in particular is timing. Like, is the timing of this verse, is the timing of when it's placed. And if you think about it, like, timing is everything. I was thinking about just this, like, the first vacation that we went on as a family, since I was married and my sister was with her, I think he was like a fiance or close to that, and we all went on a family trip together, and it was my brother-in-law's like first experience with the Goeden family, okay, which is very important. And what he did not know is that when we travel as a family, especially with my dad, he's in a hurry. It doesn't matter where we're going. I think Alabama wrote a song about it, actually. Russian, life's no fun. And so he did. And so we stop at this gas station, and we have a routine, man. It is get in, go to the bathroom, get your candy, and get out. Okay, and that's it. And sometimes you only get to do one of those two. So we're whatever, we know. But Brandon, he has never traveled with our family before. It's our first gas station stop. And we're all sitting in the van waiting for Brandon for probably 15 minutes. And we're thinking man, I hope he's okay. That's a long time in a gas station bathroom. Man, what is going on? And he comes into the van all happy, and we're like, Brandon, what are you doing? And he rolls up his sleeve, and he went to one of those coin machines and got a ton of temporary tattoos. And he spent 15 minutes putting temporary tattoos on his arm because he thought that was going to impress my dad. His head exploded. But that was it. That was his first, okay, his first trip as a family. That's what he did. And as we come to our text this morning, timing is important, and it's not the first, it's the last. And what we're going to look at this morning, this is the last thing that when the gospel writer Matthew sat down to write his gospel, it's the last thing that he put in it. Not only is it the last thing that Matthew put in his gospel, but it's also what Matthew is saying, this is the last thing that Jesus did before he left earth. So in terms of things that are significant, if we're just going on timing, what we're getting ready to look at is something that Matthew thought was so important that he put it at the end. And so what I want to do is I want to look at some of the context. So we're going to go through it a little slower, but it'll help us apply it at the end. So this is Matthew's Gospel, Matthew chapter 28, and we'll pick it up actually in verse 16, and we're just going to read the first couple verses, and then we'll do two together. So it says this, Now the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain to which Jesus had directed them. This is one of those verses. So here's what we know. We know that this is after Jesus rose from the dead. Jesus had already been crucified. He rose. And we also know, because of the word 11 there, that Judas is no longer with them either. So Judas is gone. There's just the 11. That there's a lot of probably uncertainty with what's going on. And it's a verse that frankly, we probably glance over. We don't really think about too much because we get to the ones that maybe have more substance. I feel like they have more substance. But it's a verse that shows us how committed these 11 guys were to Jesus. And you see it because it says that they went to Galilee. Now, if you don't think a lot about ancient Near East geography, it's okay. Here's what we know about Galilee, is that Galilee would have been 100 miles away from Jerusalem. Jesus was crucified in Jerusalem. They would have been in Jerusalem with Jesus when that happened. And so they would have had a conversation before Jesus was crucified where Jesus said to them, hey, I'm getting ready to die. I want you to travel 100 miles. Mind you, they don't have cars. To go to Galilee, and I will meet you there. And the crazy thing is, they went there. Just imagine this with me, okay? You're sitting by someone's deathbed, and you're like, hey, you're having your final interaction with them before they die, and like, hey, after my funeral, I'm going to meet you in Rolla. I'll see you at the lunchroom at Missouri S&T. Like, are you going to Missouri S&T in that situation? Maybe, because you're like, this is weird, but like probably not, right? And we're aware of the idea of someone raising from the dead because of Jesus. They wouldn't have been raised, but here's the deal, they go. They go because he has this influence on them where they're like, well, if he said it, I guess we should go do it. And what's fascinating to me is that though they were willing to go, there still is this sense in the text where they're like, yeah, we'll go, but this is still difficult to grasp. Look at this in verse 17. It says, and when they saw him, so they travel 100 miles to Galilee, and they see him, and they worshiped him. But some doubted. And I just, this is one of the reasons why I really love the scriptures, is because if this was just like propaganda, that if this was just something that was meant to like manipulate the masses into believing some false story, why would you put in there that some doubted? Like, the point is of what's happening, what Matthew wants you to, is it isn't propaganda, that it's a gospel. And so what Matthew wants you to know is he's saying, this is what really happened. And if it means that there's a part of the story that's kind of difficult, I'm going to throw it in there because what I want you to know is I want you to know what happened. And even as you think about like what happened, there's some beauty in that. Because that even as these guys, these 11 guys who left everything to follow Jesus, they go ahead and they're looking at the risen Jesus, there's still some element of them that's like, man, this is a little tough to grasp. Yeah, I get it. I'm going to worship you, but man, I've never been a part of something like this before. And there's probably even in your life, like as you have a relationship with Jesus, maybe there are some hurdles that are difficult for you to cross. Maybe there are some parts of even being a Christian that are difficult for you. And you're just like, I can't deal with that. What this verse in verse 17 shows us what Jesus wants. He wants a relationship. And part of a relationship is just being honest. It's saying, okay, there are things I'm struggling with, but what we can learn from this text is we learn that we take our cues from the disciples. And that even in those moments where maybe we doubt, where maybe we struggle, where maybe there are parts that are difficult for us, that if we worship through those moments, then maybe worship will bring a different perspective to our doubt. And even with the word doubt, though, it's worth noting that it's not doubt in the same way that like an unbeliever doubts the existence of God. Like they're not like, I don't believe you, because that maybe is different, but the commentator Douglas Sean O'Donnell, he said that really more of the idea there in doubt is there's this sense of like, this is really hard to believe. That it would be like the idea of maybe someone you love going off to war, and they end up coming home sooner than you would imagine, and you're with them, and you're like, man, I just can't believe they were able to come back so soon. But even as that's the case, that they followed Jesus to this incredible level, and even as they are here, there's like, something about this heart. Which means that maybe part of a relationship with God is moving through things that are difficult, and we see them that they do that. And as they're moving through that, then what Jesus does is as he continues to go forward, is he says something. And he says something that he has certainly implied throughout his ministry, but it's something that we cannot ignore. And look at this here in verse 18. It says, when Jesus came and said to them, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Man, that is a bomb that you've got to do something with. That if someone says all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to, like, that is a statement. Like, that's one of the things where, like, when you think about the Bible, that you really can't do this thing with Jesus that some people do, where they're like, I think that Jesus was like a good teacher. I think he was a good dude. I think he made a difference in the world. And the reason why you can't put him in that box is because he says things like, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. And if you say things like that, it's either true or you're a loon. And there's really no middle ground. And I would just illustrate it this way. We're in an election year. Let's say your candidate gets up to talk. It's not going to be your candidate. Let's say the other candidate gets up to talk. And as they kick off their campaign, the first words out of their mouth are, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Now, if it's your candidate, you're going to probably figure out a way to talk yourself into voting for him. But if it's the other one, you're going to be like, we've got to do everything that we can to get this guy out of the White House. Only a crazy person would say that. Or let's say you're hanging out with your family, you go visit their church, and their pastor gets up to speak. The pastor gets up to speak, and he's like, hey guys, good news. Today, we're not using the Bible. We don't have to, because all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. You're going to lean over to your spouse, you're like, so they go to a cult. Like, that's what you're going to do, because only crazy people say stuff like that. And that's exactly what Jesus says, though. He's like, hey, all the authority is mine. This is it. Like, all authority. And so what he says next, he says it on the basis of the fact that all of the authority is his. He's like, I'm going to tell you something to do that is not easy, but I can tell you what to do because all of the authority is already mine. And he says this in verses 19 and 20. He says, go. Go, therefore, and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. Man, like the reason why there is a church 2,000 years after Jesus said this on the other side of the world in a place called Springfield is because they did that. because they believed that he had all the, and so they're like, yeah, I guess this is what we're going to do. And because of maybe some of the familiarity of this passage, like if you've grown up in church, and if you haven't, that's okay. You will become familiar with it. But because of some of the familiarity with it, it's easy to just kind of like let the power of it get lost on you. I mean, just imagine what these guys would have felt when they heard Jesus say this. Like, they don't know what he's going to say. Like, some of them are surprised he's even there. And then he tells them this. There just had to be all these thoughts washing up. There had to be this sense amongst the room, or amongst the 11, where they're like, okay, you want me to go to all the nations. Now, mind you, these are 11 guys. They're Jewish. And if they really go to all the nations, that means that they are going to go places that hate them just because they're Jewish. So they're like, you want me to leave where people are down with me to walk to a place where the second they see me and realize where I'm from. I mean, there had to be a little bit of like, are you sure? Not only that, but what does he tell them to do? He tells them to teach. He's like, teach them these things. And the only, like, at least for the last 3 years, the only example of religious instruction that these guys have received is from Jesus Christ. Maybe we don't say this enough. He was the best teacher to ever teach. That when he would talk, he would draw a crowd. That his points were incredible. You couldn't argue with Jesus. And they're like, and these guys are like unschooled. They're not the teacher type. And so they've got to be thinking, wait a second, you want me to follow you? There's all kinds of reasons. You're God's son, and you want me to do now what you did? I mean, to use a horrible example, it's almost like the guy who's following Nick Saban, but not at all like the guy who's following Nick Saban, you know? Like that guy, if he wins one title for Alabama in 10 years, they're going to be like, man, it's a failure. Nick won 6. Just try following Jesus as a teacher, okay? Man, you stuttered there. That point, like, that's what they're dealing with. And he's like, so you want me to teach? And then you've got this other part there that I think would have been really weird. And he's like, you need to baptize people. Now, we're familiar with the idea of baptizing people. We have a tank that looks very nice. This is helping people know Jesus better on the front. We'll fill it up with water this week and even warm it up for you. Like, you walk in here and you see someone getting baptized, like, you're not going to be like, what? You might not understand the significance, but like, you're not going to be like, that's strange. Like, I don't think that that's going to be your deal. But like, he's like, hey, I want you to go like help people know me better. I want you to go make some make disciples of all the nations, and I want you to baptize them. So just think of how those conversations would have gone. They're like, okay, so yeah, and then they say they're talking with someone, and they're like, I will follow Jesus. Yes, I believe that he rose. I'm putting my trust in him. And they're like, awesome. Let's go find some water. Why? I'm going to go dunk you in it. I don't think I need that. Like, I just took a bath. Like, what do you mean? Oh, it's not like that. What do you, like, I mean, just like, that would have been strange. And he's saying, no, this is part of what you're doing. And it shows us the significance of baptism. I think a lot of times what people do with baptism is they'll be like, it's not that big, it's not that important. I'm going to skip that part. I love Jesus, it's cool. I'm not going to get baptized. I don't want to get wet in front of people. That's silly. Like, and the thing is, that is a very bold thing to say, considering that before Jesus goes to heaven, like, this is part of his instruction. He's like, this is such a significant thing that before I go, like, I want to make sure you know that this is part of the deal. And so we come up with all these reasons to talk ourselves out of it, but man, it's part of the last thing. And that's why it's so important for us to make it very easy for people, because it's an easy way to do something Jesus would want you to do. And then you have the next piece here, where it's like, okay, so big picture, as this is washing over them, they've got to be wondering, wait a second, Jesus, you want me to do for others what you have done for me. So in the same way that you made me like you, now you want me to help make other people like you. That'd be heavy, right? Like this is what he's saying to them, that there's so much there that had to have been going through their minds. And so as we think about this text, it really comes down to two questions that we have to ask ourselves in response to it. And especially is, okay, what would Jesus do? And I would say maybe more specifically this morning, what would Jesus want me to do? And I think he'd want you to ask yourself these two questions. The first one is this, is who am I listening to? Who am I listening to? That part of the assumption here in the text is that in order for the church to get to where it needs to be, talking about the capital C church, is that there are people who are pouring into other people, making disciples. That's part of the process. And so that means that you in that process, part of you in that process is other people pouring into you. So the question that we have to ask ourselves is, okay, so who am I listening to? And the first place in this text that it starts with Jesus. Jesus says, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. That's a good place to start. So for you to ask yourself, who am I listening to? Am I listening to Jesus? That when Jesus says something, do you do it? That when your life is going in a different direction than what Jesus would want, do you correct your life or do you try to justify your life? That even, he says, all authority has been given to me, so do you treat him like the ultimate authority? So when you're trying to figure something out, is he the place where you look? Because if all authority has been given to him, then he should be the first place that we look. And part of what makes this challenging, especially in our culture, is that, we have answers to just about everything at our fingertips, right? I would imagine that several people in this room, or those watching online, have completed a project because of a video that you watched on YouTube. Or if you're like me, you've started projects that other people have had to complete. But still, the same idea is there, that it's there, you tried. There are people in this room, I'm sure there are people in this room, those watching online, who you have gotten financial advice from a reel. And you're like your head's down. That's why I'm in a Roth. And then there, I know this to be true because people send me these. You've learned about Jesus on TikTok. People send me questions all the time. Hey, I saw this on TikTok. I don't have the app, so I have to do it all backwards to get to it. But then it's is this legit? And I honestly, I don't think it's bad that stuff's there. But it's bad when you treat those things like they're the ultimate authority. It's bad when that's the first place that you look and not Jesus when it comes to what he would want you to do. And so is he the ultimate authority? But then beyond that, are there people? Are there people who you allow to speak into your life and help you know Jesus better? Because if you're nah, not really, then what you're saying with your life is you're saying, I'm on the top of the mountain and no one needs to speak into my life, which is a very bold thing to say, I think. I'm so thankful for the people that God has brought in my life to help me know him better. I remember when I first got saved, when I was 15 years old. I remember going over to my youth pastor's house, and he wasn't married then, so he had a ping pong table in his living room. Wives don't let stuff like that happen. And I remember we would sit there and we'd just play ping pong. And man, I remember he was probably so annoyed because he just wanted to play ping pong. I'm like, hey, so how does the world end? And he's like, what? How does it end? What was, and then he's he answers his question, hey, I just read Revelation. And then he's like, oh my gosh, I just thought we were playing ping pong, But that's part of the process. Even that same guy, that same guy's a pastor in Kansas City right now. And I can think of 3 times over the course of me being the pastor at New Life where I have gone and had lunch with them because I had questions. That's part of it, is who do you have in your life that's speaking into you? And it doesn't have to be weird either. If you were to go up to someone and you were I would like you to disciple me. Like, they're probably going to say yes, but they're going to hate you for it, you know? But what if, and it doesn't have to be like that. But what if there's like someone in your life that you respect and you just know that like spiritually there is a substance to them? It wouldn't be crazy for you to go up to them and say, hey, what are your devotions like? What are you doing to like grow in your relationship with God? What is your routine? Like that doesn't feel weird. That seems pretty normal. And what you're doing is you're saying, hey, I want to listen to you. Maybe there are people and they've got great kids and you watch them parent and you're like, man, I would love to, like you could go up to them and say, hey, what do you do as a parent? What are the routines in your home? What are you doing to help your kids know Jesus better? Like that's part of the discipleship process. Is you're saying you're not saying disciple me, but you're saying like, hey, I see this. I'd like to learn from you. Maybe there's someone they've been married for a long time, and like, man, they seem happy, which just seems like a miracle, right? And hey, tell me about that. How did you get to that point? What do you do? Tell me about that. What was it like when your kids left the house? Like all of those things are like real things to ask yourself. And the beauty of the local church is that as you're involved in the local church, you make relationships with people and you find people who have those character traits that you might want. As you're serving or as you're doing something, you'll get to know people and you'll be like, man, and then you can ask them, hey, how do you do this? So part of this idea is to say, okay, who am I listening to? And then the second question that this text would ask us is not only who am I listening to, but the other part is who am I speaking to? That who am I speaking to you to? Because as Jesus shows up and he's like risen and they're like worshiping him, Jesus doesn't say like, just stay in this moment right now. He's like, all right, guys, we're just going to huddle, we're going to pray, and that's it. But he says, hey, go, therefore, and make disciples of all the nations. He's saying, I'm doing something in you so that you will go and be part of that process with other people. He's saying, in the same way that I have discipled, Jesus is saying, in the same way I've discipled you, now I want you to go do that for other people. And the command wasn't just for them, but it's also for us. Which, like, there's probably part of that just feels daunting, right? Like, you want me to do that? And it probably should. But if we think of it in terms of relationships, I don't know that it has to be that daunting. Because if you were to look at your life, there are probably a lot of things that you do, and the reason why you do them is because of a relationship. Like, I was thinking of it, just a few stupid ones for me. Like, I wear black no-show socks. 8 years ago, I wore white no-show socks. I'm a millennial. I don't want you to know I have socks on. That's just a thing that we do. And, like, I have these, and the reason why, okay? The reason why is because I was at a friend's house. He took off his shoes. He had on black no-shows, and I thought, that looks cool. And I changed my socks for the rest of my life. All because of a relationship. And he has no idea. I mean, but think about think about the restaurants that you eat at. Like, why do you, like, you probably didn't go there because, like, this sign is really nice. Like, maybe some of them are, and then you're like, this restaurant is really bad, Mexican. Like, you know what I mean? But for the most part, it's because someone told you. Like, I was, like, one of my favorite restaurants. It's like, it is so good, okay? And it's everything you'd ever want. And the reason why I know about it is because of Cassidy. He was like, man, there's this place. They have every type of food that you could ever imagine. And you can eat as much of it as you want. And I was like, this sounds Golden Corral. Like, it is and he's like, it's the golden standard. What better color is there? It's not Silver Corral, it's the Golden Corral. But why do you do those? You do it because of a relationship. Like, you make it's not that crazy, it's not that hard. You're just like, man, that influenced me. And you can do the same thing for people with Jesus. That as you live the life that you live, as you live in front of people, man, it just happens. And one of the things I love about New Life is when we have these conversations or in like our growth track class or in Party with the Pastors or when you see how people got connected to the church, more often than not, it's because of someone who invited them. It's because someone had a relationship with them. That even last year there was a guy and we baptized him and he wanted to be baptized by the person who brought him here. And that guy who baptized him had to be thinking, man, I did it, man, I did it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, and it was just through the context of relationship. And when you think of discipleship in the context of relationship, it's way better. It's less intimidating because we all have relationships. It's less intimidating because there's like less pressure on you to see people change really fast because it's a relationship and relationships take time. It's also better because like through relationships, it's easier to say like things that are hard to say. As Jesus discipled these 11 guys, it wasn't just him constantly telling them, hey, you're crushing it. But it was him constantly saying, hey, that's not it. You got to and when you have a relationship with someone, it's much easier to give them that type of, because it's through the course of a relationship. It's not as threatening. And so for us, we have this expectation to go, to do something, to make disciples. And for a lot of us, we've got people who live in our house. And really that's where it starts, I think, for a lot of people, is the kids that live in our home. That we care so much as parents, right? To make sure that our kids do well in school, that they excel in athletics, that they have every opportunity, and none of that is bad. But if you're doing that at the expense of them knowing Jesus better, then your priorities are eternally off. And so it starts by looking at your home and saying, okay, what am I doing there? But it's not just about there. It's not just about, okay, what am I doing with but it's also, okay, where has God placed me socially? Where are the circles that I'm in? Where are places where I actually have some influence and I didn't realize it? Who are people that look up to me? And then the question is, we consider those relationships, is how can I be intentional about going in that room and helping those people know Jesus better? What are parts of my life that I can live in front of them that are going to challenge them to be more like him? That's part of the command that we were given, to go and make disciples. And as I think about this, just as I close, I think that there's this part where there's a lot of pressure, but I was thinking about like this, like when I was in middle school, there was like 5 tables in our lunchroom. And there was like one table that everyone wanted to sit at. And if you're here and you don't know what I'm talking about, you were at the table. Congratulations. But everyone else wasn't. And like there are moments where like as you're sitting there in the lunchroom and you're not at the table, you'd be like, the idea of someone inviting you over was pretty cool. Like, and if they did, like, you'd be like, man, I gotta sit there today. Like that was cool. And part of what Jesus is like inviting us into is he's inviting us to sit at his table. I left out the last verse, okay? And this is the last thing that Matthew records Jesus saying before he goes to heaven. So in terms of timing, you could argue this might be the thing that he wants us to remember the most. And what is it? What does Jesus say right before he's shot up? He says, I'm with you always to the very end. After he gives this command, what he's saying the reason why is because I want to be with you. That Jesus came to be with you. The question is, what have you done with that? Let's pray. Father, we love you. And God, we're thankful that you care to be with us. You want to be with us always. And God, I'm thankful that that's what this is about. That it's about you being with us always and you wanting to be with everyone always. And because that's true, you've given us like this weighty command to go and to make disciples. And I pray, I start by like, okay, God, if there's anyone here in the reality of their circumstance, is they have not accepted the fact that all authority in heaven and on earth is yours. That they've never stepped into a relationship with you, then God, my prayer is that before we even inch any closer, that God, that they would respond to this message by putting their trust in you. And then, God, I pray for all of us. I pray that we would look at who is speaking into our life, look at areas in our lives where we need to grow and where we need to be discipled. And we find people who can help us along. And then, God, not only that, but I pray that we would find people that we can invest in. That as we live our lives in front of them, God, that they will see you in us. That, God, maybe there are people here, and the truth is that they've not taken that first step of obedience. And God, you're calling them to be baptized. I pray by the power of your Spirit, they wouldn't be able to shake it if they know it's what they're supposed to do. But God, that as we walk out of this room, as we turn off our computer, I pray that we would respond and that we would take the things that you say very seriously. Jesus, it's in your name I pray. Amen. Amen. Love you guys.
Thanks so much for checking us out online. I just hope that whatever you saw, that it was a blessing and an encouragement to your life.
And if you'd like to give today, there are 2 ways you can do so. You can text your amount to 84321, or you can go to giving.nlspringfield.com and give that way. And if you'd like to join us in person, we'd love to have you. Our service times are at 8, 9:30, and 11.
And if you're new, the first Sunday of every single month, we have an event called Party with the Pastors, which is a great way for you to get to know us, and it's a great way for us to get to know you. So we look forward to seeing you there.